thank you so much, everyone, for staying. I appreciate this. As you may or may not know, this is this theater's 35th anniversary, which is an amazing milestone in off-Broadway theater for sure. And I'm just delighted to have Marlene Swartz, the founder of Soho Rep, back to speak a bit about the history of the theater that she created. So I should really say maybe welcome home as well as welcome back. But I'm curious, Marlene, to know, to go way, way back in the past, what were you doing in the world before you and Jerry started Soho Rep?
Yeah, I have to just say, I didn't start it, but I started it with Jerry Engelbach. Well, I was staffing the Occupational Safety and Health Administration for the United States Department of Labor. I was a Fed.
That's fairly theatrical, perhaps.
I was a federal employee, and it was a very well-paying job right out of college. And Jerry was the marketing director for a very famous toy company called Creative Playthings. Some of you may know Creative Playthings. Yeah, Jerry was the marketing director for that. But at night, we were both working for Christopher Martin at CSC, Classic Stage Company.
And what gave you the idea to found a small theater?
We got fired for insubordination.
Awesome. Many theaters have started on such grounds before.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm really interested in the earliest days. You know, you came from Classic Stage Company, which is certainly nothing quite like what we saw tonight. A sort of a place that specializes in modern work. What drew you to classical work in the beginning?
Well, that was what I studied in school. That's what I studied when I studied theater in school, was classic theater. And the work that Christopher was doing, Chris Martin, who was the founder of CNC, the work that he was doing at the time was very theatrical and interesting. And when we got fired, we said, well, there's two theater companies doing classical theater, so if we want to do classical theater, we better find a different kind of classical theater to do. And so that was where we got our idea of doing rare classics. And so we did plays by de Gelderode, and at that time Coriolanus hadn't been done for years and years and years, and The Master Builder by Ibsen, and that was the start.
And if you look at those original seasons, they're monster seasons. There was maybe like 15 shows a season, and now we only do 3 shows a season because it really we like to sink all the resources in. But maybe speak about that model. I mean, how the hell did you guys pull off 15 a year?
We had no funding, and we had to survive on box office. And the only way to do that was to always have a show open. And so we'd have 2 shows running in rep, and we'd be rehearsing 2 more. And one of the things that I wrote in the essay was that our budgets at that time were, the set budget was $35, the costume budget was $35, and the prop budget was $35. And there was no lighting budget because we had installed a repertory lighting system that was Blue Man Group meets Canal Street. It was all those, reflectors, those $4.99 reflectors, and then we sprayed foil black and attached it with clothespins so that we could, have some focus on the lights. And that was it.
Just like the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Just like the Royal Shakespeare.
The book that Marlene is referring to is this 35th anniversary book, which includes about 50 essays from people that have worked at the theater, everyone from Kathleen Turner, her first job out of college was at Soho Rep, to Daniel Auken, who directed the production tonight. So I really urge you to dig deeper if you get the urge.
Yeah, we also, the artistic director of the Cleveland Playhouse, Michael Bloom, directed here, and Carrie Perloff, who's the artistic director of ACT in San Francisco, and lots of designers, that Donald Holder, who designed The Lion King and a million other things, and Spider-Man.
I think design has been such an important part of this theater for so long. Was that really something that you went into making the theater thinking that it would be a home for?
Yeah, we weren't into, the kind of kitchen sink plays that were largely popular then, that required realistic, naturalistic sets. We were interested in much more theatrical kind of work, the kind of work that it couldn't possibly be done on television or in film. And so design was critically important to us from the beginning. Believe it or not, on $35, I swear we still managed to get noticed for our design.
And I think it's definitely something that still holds true so
Absolutely.
much today for Soho Rep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if any of you, if this is your first visit here, but this theater's been completely designed for this production. Our seats are never like this. The designer Eugene Lee made this sort of teaching hospital set. So it's nice to know that it was from the very beginning. You were looking at these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Our next production here is Uncle Vanya, which I think is kind of wonderful since Soho Rep started as a home for classics, and now in our 35th year we're going back around.
Yeah.
I think that you did a version of it in 1976. Mm-hmm. Can you just maybe tell us a little bit about the first time Soho Rep did Uncle Vanya?
Sure. I took 12 translations and wrote a new one. And I'll never forget just, there's an actor's nightmare, which is that you don't remember your lines, but there's also, I had a director's nightmare. And the director's nightmare was that the show opens and people are just kind of the actors are just milling about, and they say their lines, but there's no laughs and there's no moments and nothing makes any sense. And I always think in the dream, oh my God, it was better at the first read-through before I got, before I got my hands on it. And that's my director's nightmare.
It fell apart when you started to stage it and get up from the table.
And so the show opens and there was a laugh, and I was just always so nervous on opening night. Oh my God, they're laughing! What's happened? Did somebody fall over? And they're like, no, they laughed because it was funny. It's good. It was, I did an adaptation, and it was we were non-equity in the beginning because we didn't have the money to pay equity actors. And it was wonderful in a lot of ways and not completely satisfying in other ways. But
well, I like the fact that the company can revisit the play now in a very different production. That's maybe a good segue to my next question, which is, there must be dozens, but are there any particularly hilarious or particularly ridiculous memories that stick out decades since?
Many, 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 many ridiculous and funny memories. Well, I do remember that we wanted to throw the theater open and meet a whole bunch of new, interesting directors. So we decided to do a one-act play festival. We were going to do like 8 or 10 one-act plays, and we invited, just put the word out, for directors to submit projects that were Soho Rep-like. And one guy said, I found this book of poems, and I'd like to turn it into, write some music for it and get a choreographer. And we said, great, that sounds great. And so we had our whole lineup, and the show was in rehearsal advertised it was going to open, and the phone rings one day, and there's this very posh British accent saying, "I understand you're doing a production of this particular thing, and are you aware that a show opens on the West End in a month? Who gave you the right to do this? Where did you get the rights?" And I said, "Oh my God, I guess I forgot to get the rights. Who's doing the production in the West End?" And she said, "Andrew Lloyd Webber." So obviously the book is Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, and I'm talking to Mrs. T.S. Eliot. And she says, "I'm going to shut it down." And I cried and begged, and so she let us do it. And it was a huge success, not as big as theirs, but...
But as Marlene says in the book, ours was if you're a cat lover, the Soho Rep production was the far superior production.
Wasn't corny.
And you credit in your essay Len Jenkin, who's a writer that we've worked with a lot at Soho Rep over the years, as the first American playwright to reflect and to top your idea of what theater could be.
Yeah.
Can you speak a bit more about that?
Well, for one thing, I read a review in The Voice by Michael Feingold, and he mentioned Lenny Bruce when he was reviewing Len's play called Limbo Tales. And Jerry and I were both such huge Lenny Bruce fans. We had to go see the play, and it just seemed like the plays that we were being exposed to at that time were, I think, as I mentioned before, straight, naturalistic, kind of kitchen sink plays, and it just wasn't our thing. And we went to see this play that was so unbelievably imaginative and theatrical and hilarious and dark and twisted and not completely comprehensible and brilliantly acted with the most fabulous language. So what was not to love? And we invited him to do whatever he wanted. I didn't even read the play before we committed to it, because I thought, this man is a genius, and this is the kind of work that we want Soho Rep to be doing. And Len, in turn, turned us on to Mac, and Mac turned us on to other people, and
that's Mac Wellman, who's an equally weird and wonderful contemporary playwright.
Right. So that's how we began the swing from beautiful old language to beautiful new language.
It's a lovely way of putting it. And I guess piggybacking on that sort of idea, because what you're describing sounds like Soho Rep from yesterday. It sounds like exactly like the sorts of things that are still being produced here. What, in your estimation, do you think are elements that have stayed the same about the theater that you founded 35 years ago, and what has maybe changed?
Aside from just getting bigger and better, well, two things. Jerry and I started Soho Rep for a couple of reasons, but one big one was that there weren't a lot of women directors in 1975, and I bloody well didn't want to pound the pavement to get work. I figured there's one sure way to make sure I get to direct, and that's to start my own theater company. So obviously that's changed because we're not here anymore. But other than that, I think that bigger and better. I mean, the same kinds of plays, the same kind of challenging material, political at times, not at others, theatrical, amazing language, great design. I mean, I think Julian and Daniel and Sarah have carried on amazingly, topped everything we ever did, and taken good care of the kidlet.
It's been amazingly consistent, it sounds like, from one to the next. And when did you decide you were ready for something new? And what is that new thing?
Yeah. I directed the Blue Man show at the Astor Place Theater.
Blue Man Group?
Blue Man Group at the Astor Place Theater. And it just kind of felt like it wasn't going to get much better than that. That it called on my love of silent film and Looney Tunes cartoons and what I knew about modern art and anthropology and science fiction, and something just told me that it was time to move on to something else. And I wanted that something else to not have large numbers of people involved. I didn't want any funders, any boards of directors, any actors, any casting agents, any designers. I just wanted me...
And widows of great British poets.
Widows of great, millions of plays. I just, like, me and another person, something simple.
Yeah.
And so I became a psychotherapist. And
with a particular twist, right?
With a twist. I not exclusively, but primarily deal with people in the arts, in film and theater, painters, musicians, consult occasionally with arts groups, help solve decision-making problems in bands, did a consultancy for a reality show. I had to interview all the people to make sure that they seemed like they were going to not break down.
or break down is what the producers really wanted.
In this case, they didn't. But, so I'm sure.
Terrific.
And it's just me and one other person in the room, and it's just great.
Well, we have more than one other person in the room, so I'm wondering if anyone has any questions for Marlene about the old days of Soho Rep or anything that we might have touched on.
Anybody here ever see a production at Mercer Street or Greenwich House? Do you remember what?
No. I was trying to think about the first thing that I'd seen, but I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
Because over the years there have been so many.
There's been so many.
Yeah.
I think in the book it's not completely complete, but there is a list.
We get pretty close to it.
It's pretty close, from 1975. And I bet you'll recognize some of them.
Including the year that Soho Rep was in residence at Bellevue Mental Hospital, which has some hilarious stories in the book about actors confronting mental patients, and that split second they think, well, which one is the crazy one?
Yeah, there's a very, very famous Shakespearean stage direction, Exit Pursued by a Bear. And we were doing Winter's Tale that year at Bellevue Psychiatric Building. And there was no crossover, so if you exited stage right and had to come in stage left, you had to either go outside, And so the woman who was playing the bear had to exit stage right and come around and enter stage left as a different character. And naturally, of course, I felt really bad. She goes out and, the cops are escorting him in.
That one could keep you up at night still.
That's a great story.
That was an interesting year at Bellevue.
You seem like you've had an incredibly broad range of experience, and I'm particularly interested as a musician in dealing with music in the theater and drama without music in the theater. It's not a question of which one's better or which one's easier. Talk about the contrast of working with each.
I didn't do that much work. Well, do you mean as in musical or?
Blue Man.
Well, Blue Man.
Okay, and some of the early musical work.
At Soho Rep, I think I only did 2 musicals. Blue Man was quite different because they had been working on their show for a while. And by the time I got involved, they had already done the show at La Mama. So they had sort of the bones of something. In the case of Blue Man, working with the music, my job really was to kind of find a way to use the music to keep the show tight and moving forward in a kind of scary, dangerous way. I mean, that was really what I wanted. I wanted the audience sitting on the edge of their seats, not knowing if they were going to get a bucket of paint or what was going to happen next. And so finding a vocabulary for that, actually wound up using spaghetti westerns. The idea that the bad men is just over the hill. But at Soho Rep, we were really big on, because we couldn't afford live musicians very often, we were really, really big on recorded music, and it was something that my partner, Jerry, who's a musician, was brilliant at. He could take a play that was in such horrible shape, and he could find the right piece of music to bring up at the right moment to get an emotional response. So we used live music as frequently as we could. I don't really think I'm answering your question in a way that, but it wasn't very often that we could. One of the cases was we came across a whole genre that had just been really neglected, and that was the American melodrama. And, the woman tied to the railroad tracks and the trains coming, and we did it. But those kind of productions really needed live music. And so we would scrape together the money to hire a fiddle player or in that case, Michael John. That was the production that he played the piano for.
It's Michael John Lechusa, who has gone on to write some really heavy-hitting musicals for places like Lincoln Center.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to be perfectly honest, if we could have had live musicians at every single play, we would have, because you go to the movies, and it's so drenched to vomitous proportions. The way they, put those horrible scores, you're not even allowed to feel anything. But when you have a live musician playing in the theater, it's just a completely different experience. And I wish we could have had live musicians at all of our productions, but we just didn't have the money.
It's interesting to carry it through to the ugly one, all those sound effects of the clamping and the gurning and the machines is sort of like its own score, I think. And there's big speakers in the basement, and that's why you hear that rumbling. So it's sort of like a machine opera in some ways. Are there any other questions?
When you were starting the company 35 years ago, what did you expect it to be 35 years later?
We always thought that we were going out of business. And, I mean, it never
Or even 1 year later.
That I can answer. 1 year later, to not be gone.
Was that always the goal?
You mean to continue?
Self-sustainment?
Well, yeah, I mean, by definition. The hope was that we could build up enough of an audience interested in the kind of work we did that we would be able to do fewer productions, do them better, do a better job of them. But there was our goal. There used to be something for the older people in the audience called the Elgin Cinema, and the Thalia, which is now a whole different thing. But our idea was that we really just wanted to create an environment, a place where people knew that the people who ran it had good taste, were intelligent, were nice, and that they could come and feel comfortable, feel welcome, and know that even if they knew nothing about the play, it didn't matter. They could just come and for a very reasonable amount of money see something that would be intelligent and challenging. Part of that homey feeling, I'm a little embarrassed to say, included my belief that the house cat should be allowed to run free during performances. I just thought that was so wonderful and homey. And a lot of really hilarious to me, but not to the actors, things happened when the cat would come out
Just
during the show.
Think of like 4 hours of brutal Scandinavian Peer Gynt, and then you have the cat come on out and just sort of settle in downstage and take a nap.
But anyway, so sure, sustaining, but there was an idea behind it, that we wanted to create a place that was warm and friendly and comfortable and casual, where really smart work was done, and it didn't make any difference. You didn't need a review. You didn't need to know anything about it. You could just trust that you'd be in good hands, and that was kind of the hope.
And I really think that, through your work, and Jerry and Julian and Daniel, that really is the most preeminent element of this theater. The sort of the white-hot core is what you just described. So I think it's a lovely place to end. So I want to thank you, Marlene, for coming back. And thank you. This book you can buy online, and we have it for sale in the lobby. And also, if you are jazzed about this sort of work, we have a whole series of events like this to celebrate the 35th anniversary of this big, small theater. So thank you very much.
Thank you.